Becky is a quirky cashier at a fast food restaurant. However, one day, she finds herself in a challenging situation where she must mate with her manager to retain her job. The story takes an unexpected turn, and the outcome is not favorable for the manager. Let's begin the show. Sandra, the manager of a Chickwich fast food restaurant, is facing a supply shortage. Meanwhile, Becky drives to work at a phone booth. A man angrily yells at the person on the other end of the line. Becky and Kevin arrive at a fast food restaurant. Sandra reminds her employees to do their best, as franchise quality control will come in the form of a secret customer. She then expresses concern that someone left the freezer door open last night, causing their food stock to spoil. Sandra emphasizes the importance of following procedures diligently, not only about getting orders correct, but also making sure tasks are performed in the correct order. As day approaches, Sandra's team begins work. Meanwhile, at the counter, Becky engages in conversation with the shift supervisor, Marty. Becky expresses her concern about Sandra being suspected of leaving the freezer door open. Trying to reassure Becky, Marty tells her that Sandra really believes Kevin is responsible. Their discussion focused on the man Becky was seeing. Sandra suddenly joins the conversation and informs them that her boyfriend may propose soon because he has already talked to her father. Marty and Becky congratulate him. The discussion turns back to the man who keeps sending explicit photos to Becky. Marty comments that they are both too old for this, but Sandra disagrees and says that her boyfriend knows how to keep things exciting. As Sandra walks away, she notices Becky and Marty laughing quietly behind her back. Unaware of the cause, Sandra continues her managerial duties. She checks on patron Harold and finds that he has completed his work, planning to return later for milkshakes. During her shift, Sandra's boyfriend Van calls her, asking for approval to hang out with friends. Sandra clarifies that Van does not need her permission and advises him to return to his busy work and avoid getting too drunk before ending the call. Meanwhile, Becky, Kevin and Connie are at the counter discussing changing their working schedules. Suddenly, Sandra stops them and tells them to get back to work. Soon after, Marty informs Sandra about a call from a police officer who was waiting for him at the restaurant. Officer Daniels introduced himself on the call, saying he was in touch with their regional manager, Robert Gilmer. When Sandra inquires about a possible freezer issue, Daniels denies it, saying that the call involved a theft case. Daniels shares a description of an employee who allegedly stole from a customer's purse, which matches Becky's description. He further said that Becky is part of a larger investigation. Sandra later takes Becky to the office, replaces her at the counter with Marty, and lets her talk to Daniel. Despite the allegations, Becky strongly denies any wrongdoing. Following Daniel's instructions, Sandra checks Becky's pockets and confiscates her phone, but finds nothing incriminating. After checking Becky's purse with a warning of dismissal if any stolen items are found, Sandra reports back to Daniels, confirming there is no evidence of theft. Later, Daniels informs Sandra that Becky must be placed in a holding cell overnight. He then explains that in order to take control of the situation, Sandra needs to strip search Becky. When Sandra shows discomfort at this, Daniels explains that without compliance, a lengthy trial could resulting in Becky's imprisonment. Daniels gives Becky a difficult decision whether to be detained or strip searched. Insisting on her innocence, Becky is reluctant to accept either option. However, Sandra explains the implications of denial and explains the possible consequences. After some contemplation, Becky agrees to the strip search with one condition: she wants Marty to be within the confines of the restaurant office during the process. Daniel agrees to this condition. Sandra brings Marty. Meanwhile, a conversation begins between Daniel and Becky, touching on her older brother's problematic encounters with the law. Daniels comments that Becky doesn't really know her brother, who is currently in trouble with the law. Sandra and Marty enter. Sandra explains the situation to Marty and Patty's. Search begins. Becky takes off her clothes completely, giving Sandra the opportunity to search. However, she finds nothing, leading to the fact that she immediately reports to Daniels. Undaunted, Daniels instructs Sandra to inspect Becky's underwear. However, Sandra asks Becky to take off her underwear, which Becky eventually agrees to. Sandra later confirmed that she did not find anything hidden there. Daniels then instructed Sandra to turn Becky around for a final check, after which Sandra has to put Becky's clothes in a bag and carry them to her car, as they may contain secret pockets that Sandra is not trained to identify. Daniel explains that they will check Becky. Sandra expresses suspicion, prompting Daniels to reveal confidential information. The police currently searching Becky's house due to suspicions of her older brother's involvement in drug dealing and the possibility of Becky's own complicity. Daniels explained that the scope of the investigation is wide, and he is hopeful that the stolen money will be located, which will make it easier to get a confession from Becky about the drug case. Sandra is forced to put Becky's clothes in her car and then return to the restaurant office. Marty departs to assist Connie at the counter, while Sandra tells Daniels that she needs to resume her managerial duties during the busy period. Daniels admits that a search of Becky's house is in progress and advises Sandra to assign a trusted employee to monitor Becky. In response, Sandra brings Kevin to the restaurant office and gives him information about Becky's theft and her suspicions of her brother's involvement. Kevin strongly defends Becky and her brother, whom he knows personally. Soon, Sandra lets Kevin keep an eye on Becky until the police reach the restaurant. Later, Daniels instructs Kevin to inspect Becky's entire body, leading to resistance from both Kevin and Becky, with the latter insisting that Sandra has already done so. Kevin, reluctant to participate, further excuses himself momentarily. However, Sandra stops him. Kevin expresses his discomfort over the situation, given his friendship with Becky, leaving Sandra with no choice but to return to the restaurant office. She asks Daniel what happened, and Daniel tells her that Kevin is unprofessional. Daniel scolds Sandra for sharing confidential information about Becky's brother with Kevin. He then presents Sandra with a choice either to personally monitor Becky or to find someone she trusts to do so. He suggests involving Sandra's boyfriend Van. Although she was hesitant at first, he invited her to the restaurant. Upon her arrival, Sandra briefs Van and entrusts him with Becky's care. As Van takes care of Becky, Daniel instructs him to force Becky to undress and perform a body examination. Van protests, but Daniel manipulates Becky into consenting to the search. He then instructs her to strip naked and do jumping jacks in front of the van and tells her that Becky can hide contraband inside her body. Soon, Sandra arrives and Becky pleads with her but is dismissed. When Sandra leaves, Daniel demands Van spank Becky as punishment for her disobedience. He insists that Van should not just pat him down, he should also cause him pain to send a message that his behavior will not be tolerated. Daniels tells Van not to stop until Becky learns her lesson. He also asks Van to keep the phone close so that he can hear the sound of the beating. Van obliged and ordered Becky to lie down on his lap. Then he beats her vigorously for a long time. Meanwhile, Marty asks Sandra what Van is doing at the office. Sandra tells him defensively that the van is protecting her until the police arrive. Marty volunteers to keep an eye on Becky when the number of customers slows down. Next, Daniels forces Becky again, this time to deliver Joe's blow job on the van. Becky obliges, feeling guilty over her actions. Van becomes stunned, leaving Sandra confused as she had just brought them something to eat. Sandra asks why Van isn't on the phone with Daniels, so she takes the phone. Daniels tells Sandra that her boyfriend is tired and tells her to send him home. The van suddenly leaves, leaving Sandra further confused. However, Daniels tells Sandra that she needs to find another man to take Van's place to keep an eye on Becky. Sandra hires Harold, who had just returned to the restaurant, for milkshakes. She takes him to the restaurant office and tells him everything. Sandra tells Daniels that Harold is there to keep an eye on Becky while she goes back to the counter to try to call Van. Finally, Sandra gave the phone to Harold. He talks to Daniels, who asks if Becky still has the apron. Naturally disagreeing, Harold begins to question Daniels' true motives. Daniels orders him to take off Becky's apron so he can find the money she stole. Harold confronts Daniels, but he tells him it is an investigation. Harold goes out and tells Sandra about it. Eventually, Sandra calls Robbie, the regional manager, and tells him about the situation with the officer talking to him all day. However, Robbie tells him that he had been sick all day and hadn't talked to anyone. Shocked, Sandra realizes that she has been defrauded. Sandra talks to Daniels and asks who he is, but Daniel orders food from their menu and makes a joke. Daniel hung up the phone. Soon the police are called and an experienced detective takes charge of the case. They immediately escort Becky from the premises, and the detective begins contacting individuals who can potentially help the investigation. He discovers a series of surprisingly similar cases, all connected to the same man, who leads a double life as a telemarketer and a family man. In a sharp turn of events, Daniels finds himself arrested while working in his office. The movie ends with Becky requesting to pursue a legal complaint against Sandra, but her lawyer proposes that she should target the restaurant instead. Sandra, who today is out of a job, ends her relationship with Van following the event, and she is asked by a journalist about it. But she is not able to answer all of the questions since her lawyer is there. It shows that in almost 30 states in US, over 70 similar real incidents happened over the past years, and the movie ends.